Welcome to session 12. We have Melos Azemi, who is the 3D visualizer at scale. And he today is going to talk about Archicad and Enscape from beginner to advanced. Now, for me this year, having Melos, who's a professional 3D visualizer, come on and talk about how Enscape works and the tips and tricks to actually getting things more out of it is definitely a better outcome compared to having me present on it, because I'm the amateur. So this session this year, you're going to learn a lot more about how to tweak things to get that little bit extra from turning a good image into a great image. So I look forward to seeing this presentation and what Melos has to share with you, and then we can talk with him after in the questions session about any other things that might pop up, or specifics about what are the things that people might be struggling with within Enscape, and obviously the challenges that we're all facing at the moment with for those Mac users that don't have access to Enscape yet, and the timelines in which that might come up in the future. So now I hand over to Melos.
Hello everyone, I am Melos, and I want to thank you, every single one of you, for joining this Arc intensive session. I am a creator and an Enscape user, and my mission is to help as many people as possible become Enscape experts. So today I'm going to tackle everything that you need to know from beginner level to advanced in Enscape in order to create realistic visualization. So without wasting any more time, let's go straight into the basics on how you can actually get Enscape. The Enscape section must be open for you right here at this toolbar. Now, I do have a house modeling from Archicad that I have already done previously that we're going to take a look on how we can create a realistic image. Before we do so, I want to share with you a quick thing that will make our workflow a lot easier. So just to actually show up the Enscape tools, we're just going to go to Window, we're going to go to Palette, and then we're just going to click in Enscape, and then I'm just going to move this right here. So this is the house that we will take a look at, as I said previously, and the first thing that we need to do to actually go ahead and launch Enscape is this button right here. So now I'm going to go ahead and launch Enscape. So in order to launch Enscape, we're just going to need to use one simple icon, and it's this one right here. If you couldn't find the toolbar, you can do the same thing by just clicking the Enscape ribbon here, and then you can just press Enscape. You have the same icons that I have with the Enscape palette, but it's just much easier for me to access it over here. So I'm just going to click the first button right here that it says Start Enscape. So once this part actually loads up, I'm going to be sharing with you the screen that shows up in the Enscape tab. So as you can see, this is the Enscape tab that is showed up from the modeling that I have in Archicad. So first off, I'm going to show you how we can navigate through this file, and then later on we're going to take a look at all of the configuration of the lighting, the materials, the visual settings, and all that we need in order to create a realistic look for the house that we have right here. So in order to navigate in Enscape, we can use the WASD keys, which are similar to if you've played video games in your computer previously. They're kind of the same controls, and then while left clicking with your mouse, you can look around and move at the same time with those keys. So this is one of them. Now you can use the WASD tools, and as you can see, I'm just moving a little bit. If you want to move a little bit faster, you can press the Shift key, or you can hold it while using the WASD keys. Or if you want to do it even faster, you can hold the Control key and just move around even faster than with the Shift key. This speeds up your workflow quite a bit. Now, something else that you can do is you can also hold the right click on your mouse in order to orbit around the house. So if I just hold the right click in my mouse, you can see that I am just rotating around the model that I have here. I can also scroll with the mouse wheel to get closer and to go a little bit backwards. Also, another very helpful tip that I can show you is if I double click in an object, let's say this door right here, I can just double click and it will get me close to that door. Okay, so I just showcased them a little bit to you, and now if you want to actually take a look and see yourself, if in case you forget them, you can just press the H key in Enscape, and then you can see all of the controls that you can use. I showed you some of the basic ones, but you can see a lot of those are available right here. So now that we know how to navigate around the file that we have here, we're going to take a look at some of the options that Enscape offers in the toolbar. I'm just going to take you on a little bit of an introduction on the Enscape user interface. So this is the home screen where you can actually see the model, and it is where we are right now. And then on this other one is the collaborative annotation tool. In case you're using Enscape in Teams, this is a perfect solution. So for example, let's say I wanted someone in my team to make a change in the reflection of this window. I can just click the collaborative annotation. I can just click the windows, and then I can just create an issue. And then from there, I just can name it change reflection. And then I can just type in lower the roughness of the windows, and then once they would open the file, they would be able to see what kind of changes I actually requested. Next up is the BIM information tool. So this is kind of just an overview of all the different BIM elements that are in this house. So the wall that are grouped and all of that, which is not very useful to actually get very realistic animations, which is actually not very useful in order to get realistic looks. It's more on to inspecting the actual building with better visualization. And then we have the view management section. This is very useful, and I use this quite a lot to actually swift the workflow. We can actually use this to make the workflow a lot faster. I can just choose a composition angle that I want to do for later on, and I can just click create view. And this saves the camera angle that I just used here. And I'm just going to click view 1. And we can also use a visual preset that we're going to take a look later on how that is useful for us. So I'm just going to click create. And the next up is the asset library that we have right here. In the asset library, there are over 3,000 ready-to-use objects with all the materials applied to them that you can import in the Enscape window, or you can also import them in the Archicad window. Now I'm just going to go back, and later on we're going to take a look on all of this. As of now, we're just going to continue with the rest of the icons and just explain them to you. This is the video editor, which you can create animations from. So this works very easily with keyframes. So we can just do a keyframe here, and then we can move around the other part of the house. And basically what this shows is on the left side right here is point A, and on the right side is the point B. And basically this will record the movement that it takes from point A to point B to see the building. And then if I just go and change the total duration to 10 seconds, it will make an animation from point A to point B in 10 seconds. So something like this. This is just a basic showcase of the tool. Later on, we can take a closer look on how we can actually make this look way better. Now we're just going to move on with the rest of the tools. This is the export tool, the screenshot tool, which you can use to actually create the final render. This is for batch rendering. When you have multiple views, you can actually just click on it and it will render multiple views at the same time. You don't have to click them one by one. And then it's the 360 view or the panoramic view, which you can do to actually see a 360 image on the environment that you're in. And then you can also export that on web hosting or also in other hosting websites that you can import it to. And then you also have the standalone file, which is very useful to actually showcase your design to clients with better visualizations. You cannot make edits in that file in terms of assets, lighting, and all of that, but it is very useful to just view it. And then there's also the minimap, which works very well to actually see where you're located, especially if you're working with large scale objects. I don't use this very often, but it's useful in some cases. And then you have the save frame tool, which shows the aspect ratio, which is at default right now, and it is 1920 by 1080 or full HD, and it just makes a very good framing to actually have an idea of how your composition is sitting. And then next up, you have the perspective options. You have the 3-point perspective, you have the 2-point perspective, and also the orthographic view. So the orthographic view is very useful if you want to get elevation. So for example, with the keys 4, 8, 6, 2, and 5. So if I do the 4 key, it will go to the left of the building. If I do the 6 key on my keyboard and the number keypad, it will go to the right of the building. If I press the number 2, it will go to the front of the building. Number 8, it will go to the back, and number 5, it will look at the top of the building. And this is very useful for elevations. You can also get very interesting axonometry views from this orthographic mode as well. But for me personally, I use the 2-point perspective most of the time, unless I'm taking aerial shots where I use a 3-point perspective, because the 2-point perspective just distorts the whole image. Now, this is another option that we have to walk around and navigate through the file, which is the fly mode or the walk mode. The fly mode, you can basically move up and down the whole actual model. You can press the E key to go up and the Q key to go down vertically without moving sideways. And this is basically the fly mode. And then you also have the walk mode, which is very useful to actually get the image from a sense of eye level. And you cannot go upwards or downwards with this unless you press the space key, which actually transforms it to flight mode, as you can see with the icon right here. And then next up, we have the VR headset option, which if you have a VR headset, you can actually connect it with Enscape and you can take a look on all the features that it has. And then you also have the visual settings right here. So the visual settings are very important to actually get a very good and realistic image. I'm just going to take a look at a few of them and briefly go through them to actually make the composition of the view that we selected earlier right here a lot better. So we're just going to choose this, and then we're just going to go to the main section, which is a default, the first one that opens up. And I'm going to leave the auto exposure on, the exposure the same. I want to lower the field of view a little bit. So, I mean, something like 60 or 70 degrees works absolutely fine. The depth of field, we don't need that. And then the rendering quality, I'm going to leave it at ultra because the computer that I'm using right now can handle it. And then we can also go to the corrections, which is basically color correction and all of the image effects. We can use auto contrast. We can play around with the highlights, the shadows, and all of that. Maybe we can take a look at those even later a little bit. But also the saturation, one thing that I noticed with Enscape is that the default saturation is a little bit lower. Maybe you cannot tell in the image right now because the sign brightness is a little bit too high, but you can see later on that we will need a higher saturation. So I'm just going to leave that at 107. The color temperature, I'm not sure for that as of now. We can change that later on according to the actual results that we will get. And as far as the effects go, you can see that the motion blur, the lens flare, the bloom, the vignette effect, and the chromatic aberration are all turned on. I personally don't use neither of these unless I want to make a more dramatic image, and that would include only the vignette. I will take the lens flare completely off. As you can see, this is the effect that the lens flare has, and we don't need to make it look like that. I know that sometimes you can make it look a little bit more realistic, but as of now, it is no need to use that. The bloom option has also its own effects by making it a little bit more blurry and a little bit more shiny in some areas. The chromatic aberration basically makes the edges not as sharp, which sometimes is needed, but not in our case here. And the vignette just makes it more dramatic by adding some black overlay on all of the corners. Let's just leave on the vignette at 10%, and all of the other ones we're going to turn down completely. The fog, we don't need that as of now, which basically just creates a fog. You can also change the height of the fog if you want it higher, lower, any of that. We don't need a fog as of now. The sun brightness in Enscape as default is set very high, and I personally never really like this. 80% is just way too much for me. It works best from 5 to 15%, or sometimes even at 0% in interior images, because I create artificial lighting that actually covers up the area pretty good. So I'm just going to go ahead and do 7% for the sun brightness. And as you can see, the image is automatically getting more balanced. This is just the beginning of the phases that will take over in order to create a realistic look for the image here. Later on, we're going to see a look at the materials and all the detailed lighting. These are just some of the basics. So be patient until we get a really realistic look for the image that we have here. So night sky brightness, we don't need that as of now, and doesn't make a difference if we change it or not, because we're going to take the render at daytime. The shadow sharpness, I like to leave this very, very low because I like the shadows as soft as possible. That way it is not very harsh with the sun and all of that. The artificial light brightness is okay. The ambient brightness, we're not going to need that as of now. We can turn that on or off. It doesn't really make a difference. The wind intensity is very useful if we're going to be creating a animation. So what this does is that it actually creates an animation in vegetation. We cannot tell that very much right now because we don't have any trees or water or anything like that, but we can kind of tell that with the grass. So the higher the intensity is, the more movement will be in the actual vegetation, water, and all that. But I'm going to turn this down all the way because we're just going to take a render in the final export settings. And then the sky, we can either do white background background, which is very useful for axonometry views, for elevations and all of that, but not very much for the case that we have here. So we're just going to take that off. You can also use different type of sources for the horizon. There are some presets that Enscape offers, like the desert option, which basically just has a desert output. It doesn't change much of the sky itself. We can also use the forest option. And as you can see, while we change those, some of the colors and the way that the materials reflect change because of the surroundings. And then we can also use the mountains, the construction site, and all of these. Now, these are all right for beginner level, and you can basically use those and get an all right quality. But later on, I'm going to show you a special trick that you can use in order to make your render much more realistic through some manual work, which takes a little bit more time, but it definitely is worth it with the final output that we're gonna have. Right here, we can change the configuration of the clouds. So right here, we can change the density. We can make them more dense if we want to make a more moody look. We can also change the variety of the clouds, so there's a difference between its size, its positioning, and all of that. We can also change the other type of clouds on how much we need them to actually be present. There's contrails that we can add on, and as you can see, the effects on the sky, I'm going to change the view a little bit to actually view them better. So we can take all the contrails, which we're not going to need in the final one either way, because as I said, we're not going to use the Enscape default sky. And then we can also change the position of the sky like this, and with the latitude as well. And then for the final tab of the visual settings, we're going to go to output. The resolution, I'm going to leave it at Ultra HD to get the highest amount of quality and the highest amount of pixels for our image. We can also export object ID, material ID, and all of that for post-production if you need that, but we're not going to go through that in this lesson. We're only going to take a look in Enscape. The file format, we're just going to leave it at PNG, JPEG works fine as well. You can make a default folder on which your images are exported and all of that, and then all of these settings are just for different types of exports like video, panorama, and all of that other stuff. Okay, so another thing that I want to show you is how to change the sun direction and the way the lighting acts in your image. You can do that by holding the shift key in your keyboard and then the right click on your mouse, and then just moving that around. And as you can see, the time of day is actually changing. So now we're back to daytime. And this is basically it in terms of these settings. Now let's take a look at some of the other settings in Enscape that we have here. Now, in order to make your workflow a little bit easier, is that you can just use Enscape in the corner right here, and then you can see the changes that are happening while using Archicad. This is obviously very useful because it's one of the advantages of Enscape and real-time rendering that you can see the changes immediately. So we're just going to continue with that. So right here we have live update. So if you have this turned on, you can see that, let's say I take off this window completely, it automatically gets taken off in the Enscape window as well. I'm going to use Ctrl-Z to actually undo that and get the window back. If we turn this on, this is useful if your computer can handle a lot of changes at the same time. You can turn this on, you can make changes like this, and then once you turn this back on, you can see that those changes are applied in our window in Enscape here. So we're going to undo that as well. We can also use the synchronized views option, which basically does actually synchronize whatever you're viewing in Archicad or whatever angle you have in Archicad will be masked in the Enscape window. I personally don't like to use this because I set up the camera in the beginning on what angle I want to achieve with the composition of Enscape, and then later on I want to make changes in different areas in Archicad, and it doesn't affect the view that I have in Enscape. We took a look at the asset library a little bit earlier on this tab here, so we're not going to waste any more time until we actually play some assets later on. We also have the Enscape material library, where you can find already set up materials for Enscape. In the tab right here, we can use them. We can click on one of them. So let's say brick 01 or brick 02. So let's use this brick, and we can click import selection. And then what this will do is it will import a material in the Archicad window already set up in Enscape, which you can find later on in the surface material that Archicad offers. So if I just click right here and I type in brick, so something like this, you can see that the Enscape brick is already showed up because it was imported from Enscape. And now we can just apply this material on the surfaces where I want to have brick. So I'm just going to apply this real quick. Okay, so we applied this brick material, but I actually want to make a change in this brick material right here. And we can make a change through the next icon that we have here, which is the Enscape material editor. And then we can just type in the brick name that we had earlier, which is brick 01. If I am not mistaken, it was this one. And I want to make it a little bit darker, so I'm just going to apply this color, and this is much closer to what I actually wanted to do earlier. So in order to change the color, I just clicked once again on the Enscape material editor, chose the material that I want to edit, added a tint color on the material, and then moved on from there on. So something like this will work fine for me. And now we can also take a look at some of the other settings as well. So these are the displacement maps that actually affect the material that we have here. I can turn this on or turn this off a little bit to actually make a division between the actual bricks, as you can see right now. Now I'm going to leave this at default, which was 1. And this material is already set up with all of the maps needed to actually make the material much more realistic in Enscape. But sometimes you don't have that because you have to use and import materials from the outside. But through this tutorial, I'm going to use as much Enscape materials as possible in our window that we have right here. Now let's try and apply another type of material. So let's find a plaster material that we have here. So in the Enscape material library, we do have a lot of categories that we can browse through, or you can also add a favorite icon on top of it to find it easier later on. So for example, if I go to the plaster material right here, I can just go ahead and use plaster 03. Click the favorite button, and then in the section at the favorites, I can find it with one click. So if I click the plaster material once again and I click import selection, we'll be able to find the plaster material just like we found the brick material at the surface painter library in Archicad. So I'm just going to click this, and then I'm going to apply it on all of the surfaces that we have here. Obviously, we can change the color and make it a little bit more closer to white later on. We can also use the Archicad materials as well, but that would require us to actually make changes in the bump maps, the roughness maps, and all of that. And we want to have things a little bit more automated so we can go through them faster through this tutorial, as well as in our day-to-day workflow. So I applied the material right here, and now I'm just going to go ahead and edit it in Enscape material library. I'm going to go ahead and type in plaster 03 as we have it here, and then what I will do is I will turn off the image fade a little bit. I'll apply a white color, and then from there we can change the way that this material looks like. In order for me to make the material brighter, I can just go ahead in the albedo or texture map that we have here, which is basically the diffuse map or the color map that you can find in other types of materials. And I can just click it, and then I can just click inverted, and I will tone this down as much as possible to make it look a little bit brighter. I think 20% works just all right. And then we also have the normal map applied to it. If we cannot see it very much, I will going to go and turn this up a little bit more. And as you can see now, it is more emphasized. Now I will leave this at 140, which I believe works just fine. And then the roughness section and all of that is already set up for us. Now I'm going to go ahead and apply a glass material to all of the windows, and I'm going to apply a pavement material around this path that we have in the house right here. And then we'll pretty much be done with most of the materials that we have here. We'll go and move on with some other interesting stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the glass section in Enscape, and I'm just going to find a basic glass material. We don't need anything super special. So let's just import this one and see how this one is going to act. So in order to make a more realistic glass material, we don't really need to import anything from the Enscape material library. We can edit the material from the Enscape material editor, even if the material is from Archicad. So we're going to find out and type in glass, and we're going to find out which one of these is actually applied in the windows. So I'm just going to turn on the specular option as much as possible. And as you can see, this is the option that is applied on our windows. We're going to make them a little bit more darker and decrease the roughness a lot more. So that way they reflect a little bit more and they look a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to make the roughness at 30%. Maybe tone down the specular option a little bit, and something like this will cover up our area a lot better, and we can move on with the rest of the stuff. Now we're going to go ahead in the Enscape material library once again, and we're going to go ahead with the pavement settings, and I'm going to choose maybe some type of tiles that work well with the landscape here. So I'm just going to download the pavement 11. We'll see how that works out. If that doesn't work out as we want it, we're going to go ahead in the tile section as well. Now I'm going to go, and once again in the surface painter library, I'm going to type in pavement, and you can see right here it shows up as pavement 11, and I'm just going to go and apply the material right here. I'm going to go a little bit closer, and we can see if we can edit this material a little bit. I want to make it larger and see how this works. So I'm going to go in and type in pavement 11, and now in order to change the size of it, obviously we can do that through the material editor in Archicad, but we can also do that through the material editor of Enscape. I'm going to go ahead and click the albedo map, and I'm going to change the width and the height of it. So I want at least to make it 5 times bigger, so I'm just going to click 5 by 5. And if I go a little bit backwards, it looks much closer to what I want to. But something else that I want to make sure that is better, I want to tone down the image fade and have less of a heavy texture, if that makes sense to you. And then I also want to make the roughness a little bit less. So something like this might work better in our case. And now let's go back to the view that we had here. And now I believe it looks a little bit better. Let's open the Enscape window and make it larger. And what I can notice is the brick material color isn't looking the way I want it yet. I want it a little bit more brown. And right now it's looking way too red in my opinion. So I'm just going to go ahead and try to fix that once again. It's not very technical, it's just more on trying to get the right color. So I'm just going to go ahead in the Enscape material library once again. I'm going to go add the brick material. So brick 01. If I'm not mistaken, it was this one. And then let's just change the color to something a little bit darker. We can also change the tint of it. So let's just make this one brown. And then let's just make this a lot darker. So something like this is much closer to what I actually wanted rather than what we had earlier. Maybe this is way too dark and maybe this is way too regular. So let's just tone this up a little bit, go over here. Maybe something like this works much better in our case. So I think I'm happier with what we have here than what we had earlier. This is pretty much what I wanted to achieve. So now we have set up most of the materials right here. We can get closer to them to actually check the quality. As you can see, the brick has depth. It has a lot of good aspects that make a brick material look realistic. And then if we go to the other material that we have here, which is the plaster, it has irregularities, which is always a good thing in rendering. And then one thing that we missed is this glass material right here, which we can fix in just a second. The pavement looks fine. Maybe we apply material on this walk-in blocks as well, and then we can move on with the rest of our image. So for the walk-in blocks, as I said earlier, I'm just going to go ahead and download a concrete texture. I'm going to use concrete 03. Once that is imported, I'm going to go ahead and find it just like we did previously and apply it to these walk-in blocks that we have here. So let's just move on with the surface painter. Go ahead with concrete. I'm going to download it and apply on our surfaces that we have here. So just like this, it works perfectly fine. Now I just want to make it a little bit brighter, or at least less dark, if that is better said. So concrete 03, let's make it brighter. So something like this works much better. All right, so I'm pretty much happy and feeling good with the materials that we have. Now we're going to move on to the assets. We're going to populate the scene much more and make a better composition that we have here. After that, we're going to take a look at lighting. And then finally, we're going to take a look at the visual settings and how we can achieve a realistic look with the color correction tools as well. So now that we're done with the materials and we looked through some of the Enscape settings, we're going to take a look at the Enscape asset library. So the Enscape asset library, we can actually apply the assets in 2 different ways. We can do that straight away from the Enscape window that we launched earlier, or we can import them from the Archicad window. So I personally like to apply them from Archicad unless I have to do a multi-placement. So let's just take a look at this real quick. So I'm going to go to the asset library, and then when you go to the asset library, you will be able to find a numerous amount of categories right here. And then you also have tags to actually filter them out better. So as of now, I want to add some vegetation. Now, when I choose the vegetation category, I will go ahead and also use the hedge filter, and that way only hedges show up in my screen. Now I can click on the hedge that I want to actually import. I can click on inside the window, and then from there on, I can just use it, click it, and then I can also rotate it on the direction that I want it to be set at. Now, this works all right, but in my opinion, is just way too much work, and all the Archicad tools are much easier to actually do the rotation and all of that. But the reason why I think it is useful to sometimes place assets from the Enscape library inside of the Enscape window is because of this tool right here, which is called the multi-asset placement. So what this does is that I can just click the hedge, and I can also just move around like this just a little bit, and then I can just click a starting point from here up, let's say up to here, and then I can just make the width much thinner. I can also change the random rotation, and I will also make the distribution as uniform as possible. Now, in this instance, as you can see, the rotation does not fit very well for our case, but what we can do is we can just rotate it on the other side. So let me just take a quick second right here. So let me just move around and navigate. So let's say on the back of the house, we wanted to add some more hedges like the ones that we have here. I can just simply do this, and they're automatically placed in a straight line. I can make the density a little bit higher. That way there are no spaces between them and all of that. So let's just take a quick look on how this is going to come up as. And something like this can definitely work, but we can also do it a lot easier manually in a few instances. So to do that, I'm just going to leave the Enscape asset library inside the window. So I'm just going to go discard and leave, and I'm just going to use it in the Archicad window. So I'm just going to click asset library, and we're going to go and find it in the same way. So once I open the asset library, we're going to go to vegetation. We're going to wait a little bit until it loads up, and we're going to go and continue on to the filter or the tags of hedge. And I'm going to choose the same one that I did earlier, and I'm just going to place it right here. Now, once I choose this, let's just move it to the actual location that I want it to be placed. So now I will just rotate it through Archicad. And what I want to do is I want to make it a little bit bigger. Let me just change the composition to right here. I will move it forward. That way it's actually captured inside the composition that we have. And I will go inside the Enscape asset library. I will select this one, and I want to scale it and make it a lot larger. So something like this can work. I will apply changes. And then from here, I will just copy this one a few times, just like this. So now I'm just going to copy all of these as well. I'm going to copy on the other side of the actual garden, and then I'm just going to add another row of the hedges right here. Now, something that I would like to do actually is I will also add some trees around the area that we have here. So I'm going to go ahead in the asset library once again. I'm going to go and take off the hedge tag, and now I'm going to go and find some trees that actually fit with the scene that we have here. So I'm going to click the tree tag, and let's just choose maybe a little bit, maybe some pine trees. Let's try and add them through the Enscape window. So for this one, I'm going to go here. I'm just going to go and click the vegetation category, and then I will go to the tags and choose the tree tag as well. Let's just choose this one for now. So maybe something like this on the back over there can work fine, like this as well. And then I will do another tree on this part, something like this. Let's just check this out, and we can apply changes. We'll go to the image that we had earlier, I mean the view that we had earlier, and let's just see how this looks. As you can see, it's starting to populate with some vegetation, and it's going to look fuller and better the more time we actually take for this. So now what I will also try and do here is I would like to add a neighboring house. So to do that with the Enscape asset library, we can just go ahead to categories once again. We can click street props, and then from there on, I will just use one of the houses that we have available in the asset library. Okay, let's just move it like this, a little bit backwards. These give context and make the surroundings much more believable, and it actually makes them look a little bit more natural. So as you can see, houses like this hide the horizon and also make the surroundings more natural, as I said previously. Now what we will also try and do is add a little bit of landscaping around the garden of this house, and we can also add a little bit of a seating area in the front of the house as well. I will also use for this instance the multi-asset placement tool that I showed you earlier. So I'm just going to go ahead and add the multi-asset placement tool, and I will go to the vegetation, and I will also choose the bush tag. So I'm going to choose this bush, and then I will choose something like this, a fern, and something a little bit more colorful to actually break up the contrast. And then I will just go ahead and click from this point up to this point, and we will change the density, make it a little bit more dense, maybe add a little bit of width on it as well. So maybe something like this. We do need a little bit of random rotation, but what we also need is to look as natural as possible. Maybe I can add a little bit more density, and something like this can definitely work in our case. So I'm just going to click confirm placement. We're going to apply changes, and we're going to see how that looks from the view that we have here. I mean, it looks all right. We also need some bushes, which I don't think I selected earlier. I can do that real quick with the single asset placement tool. We can just go at bush. I can select this one, and I will add one here and another one here. And now it actually looks a little bit more populated, and it just fits well with the rest of the scene. Now what we can also do is add some lights for the pathway here. We can find that as well in the Enscape asset library. So we're going to go ahead with the category on the lighting, and then we're just going to scroll down a little bit until it loads up. So I'm going to choose this outdoor lamp, as it is called in the Enscape asset library, and just place it here. We're going to take a look if it is actually oriented in the right direction, which it seems like it isn't. So we're just going to rotate it like this and move it closer to the pathway. And this is pretty much it in terms of the asset placement in the exterior lighting. Now I will also try and add a little bit of a seating area outside. So I'm going to go ahead in the Enscape asset library once again. We're going to go to the furniture section. Now what I want to also do is I can also add a few of accessories on top of the table. So now something else that I want to place and to populate on the scene is someone walking, to kind of give perspective on the scale of the actual building, to actually make it a little bit better. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I will go on the Enscape asset library. I will go to people, and then I can just type in walking in the search bar. And as you can notice immediately, there will be a selection of a few of people assets that are actually moving, and it just makes the image a little bit more alive when you add people in motion in those kind of scenarios. As you can see, we just added a person, it has some movement, and it added some motion to the actual render. Now we do have a good populated scene that we have here. Obviously, it would be better if there was some interior furniture to make it look even more realistic. But since this is a crash course, I just want to get some of the most important parts done. So I think this is pretty good, and it actually is good enough in terms of populating the scene with assets. Now for one of the final parts, we're going to take a look at lighting. So earlier I mentioned that here at the sky section in the visual settings, we can use something a little bit more advanced. So what we can use here is an image called an HDRI, which is basically an image that was taken in real life that we can import in our rendering view to match the lighting from real life scenarios. Now, where can we find these kind of images? So one of the places that I like to search for HDRIs is polyhaven.com. Obviously, I'm not affiliated with them by any means. It's just what I use in my day-to-day workflow. This one looks fine, so I can just click it, and then I can choose HDR as the version for the file to import. Make sure you actually choose this, because this is the only way you can import it into Enscape. So I'm going to download it. And then once it is downloaded, I'm going to go to the visual settings. I will go to the sky, and then for the source, I will choose Skybox. And then once this is selected, I will click load Skybox from file. And then from the download section in my computer, I will load it up. And now, as you can see, the image is all around the 3D model that we have here. The lighting doesn't look very realistic, and that's because we have to do some tweaking. So right after you load the skybox, you have the option of brightest point as sun direction, which basically is self-explanatory, but it just gets the brightest point of the image. So for example, is that part right here, and that would act as the direction from which the sun comes from. And as of now, Enscape is still getting the sun source from the default Enscape sun. So once we go ahead and click this, you can see that the lighting matches much more realistically with the rest of the image. Now, I don't like the orientation of the sun as it has right now, so we can just go and rotate the whole image and get a different type of direction for how the sun acts, how the actual shadows look like, and all of that. So something like this can look all right in terms of the sun, but what I would also do is I would tone down the sun brightness just a little bit. Maybe 3% is enough, and all of that. So I chose this HDRI without testing it or anything like that. It looks a little bit too cloudy. I'm not the biggest fan of this HDRI, but this was just to showcase to you how you can download HDRI. So now I'm going to go ahead and actually import an HDRI that I'm familiar with, that I have in my computer, and that I'm kind of more confident that it would work fine. So we can also see that there's something in the background there. You can leave it or take it. Do not give too much attention on the background. You can just move and rotate it around. Maybe I want now to actually tone up the sun brightness once again, and something like this can definitely work all right in terms of the exterior lighting. I always recommend you to use HDRIs because they're just based on real life physics, and obviously you cannot compete with a computer generated sky when someone has actually taken a real life photo of the sky and the actual environment. So the projection is going to be set at 2 point. We can also play around with the exposure, but I believe that auto exposure at 50% can work fine in most of exterior images. Now the field of view and all of that we took a look earlier. We can also use the depth of field option, which basically works as a blur. So if I want to blur the beginning part of the head here, I can turn up the depth of field to something like, let's say 18%, and then I will take off the autofocus. And once I take off the autofocus, we can choose where the focal point goes. So the more on the left, the closer the focal point will be. And as I move it, you will be able to see a white line moving across the model here, as you can see in the edges. And what this does is it tells the camera to focus in that part of the image. Now, the more I turn on the depth of field, the more blur is going to be on the area that the focal point is not in. So right now, as you can see, the hedge is a lot more blurred. So we can leave it like this. Doesn't make a huge difference, but it's just a good add-on to actually add on your own images. And then from here, we did take a look on these parts as well. Let's just take a look on the corrections of the contrast and all of that. We can make the highlights a little bit brighter, the shadows a little bit lower, but they look all right with auto contrast as well. So we can leave it at auto contrast. The saturation, we took a look at that. Now the color temperature is just changes the way or the tint that the image has. So the more the slider is onto the left, it's warmer, and then the more it is on the right, it's colder, or at least cooler. So I'm going to leave it at default as of now, and maybe I just move it a little bit warmer, so a little bit onto the left to actually give it more of a summer feeling to it. So yeah. Now, the sun brightness, we took a look at that. The shadow sharpness, we're just going to leave it at 0. So most of the settings we took care of earlier. And this is basically it in terms of the visual settings as well. So now I will try to make the glass a little bit more reflective to actually hide the fact that there's nothing inside. And as you can see, it's working better on the upper floors, but not very good on the lower floors. So what I will try to do is I will add some curtains in the ground floor. That way it actually is a little bit better covered up, and it just doesn't look very fake and very empty inside. So lucky for us, the Enscape library has a lot of assets that we can use. So I'm just going to type in curtain, and there's probably going to be some curtains that are going to show up. So as you can see, there's plenty of them that we can use. I'm going to choose this one, and I'm going to go inside the modeling that we have here, and I will just click inside like this. And then we move on to this part as well. Now let's get closer. I'm just going to go to the asset library. I'm going to search curtain. and find the same one that we used earlier. So it was this one, and I will just apply it like this, apply changes, go back to the view, and I believe right now we are pretty much done with the changes that we had to take. This is pretty much Enscape options in a nutshell. I tried to cover up as many things as possible and give you a full breakdown of everything from beginner level to some more advanced stuff with lighting and HDRIs. So now for the final step, I'm just going to click screenshot, which basically renders out the image, and I'm just going to save it in my desktop, and we're going to open it up in just a minute. Okay, so this is pretty much it, Enscape in a nutshell. I tried to cover as many Enscape options and as many Enscape tools as I could. Hopefully you found this helpful, and let me know if you have any questions regarding Enscape. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability.